Welcome to another exploration into the darker corners of American history, stories that remain as mysterious as they are unsettling. Before we begin, take a moment to let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time of day or night this narration has reached you. It's always intriguing to see how far these accounts travel and when they find their audience. With that said, let's journey back into the past. Deep in the rugged Ozark Mountains of Missouri, where morning mist clings to ancient limestone cliffs and forgotten hollows echo with secrets, there exists a story so disturbing that locals still refuse to speak of it in hushed tones. It's a tale that begins on a crisp October morning in 1915, when 14 men descended into the Earth's belly with nothing but flickering lantern light to guide them. By sunset, all 14 would be dead. But what rescuers discovered weeks later would haunt these mountains for generations to come. The morning air was sharp with the promise of winter when the shift began at the Black Rock mine. 14 souls gathered at the shaft entrance, their breath forming ghostly clouds in the pre-dawn darkness. These weren't just numbers on a payroll. They were fathers and sons, dreamers and survivors, each carrying their own burden of hope and desperation. As they checked their equipment one final time, none could have imagined they were about to become part of the Ozarks' most terrifying unsolved mystery. The year was 1915, and America was hungry for minerals. The Great War raged across Europe, creating an insatiable demand for lead, zinc, and other metals that lay buried beneath the Missouri soil. The Ozark region had become a beacon of opportunity, drawing men from across the nation to towns like Joplin, Webb City, and Peacher, places where fortunes could be made overnight, but where death lurked in every tunnel and shaft. This was the era of the great mining boom, when the tri-state mining district stretched across Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma like a vast underground empire. The earth here was riddled with caverns and veins of precious ore, but it was also unstable, unpredictable, and utterly unforgiving. Mining companies sprouted like mushrooms after rain, each promising prosperity while often delivering only tragedy. In towns throughout the Ozarks, wooden headframes pierced the sky like monuments to human ambition. The constant rumble of machinery and the acrid smell of sulfur became the backdrop of daily life. Children grew up to the rhythm of the mines, the early morning whistle calling men to work, the evening siren marking another day survived. But beneath this industrial symphony lay a darker melody, one whispered in the local folklore that spoke of cursed ground and restless spirits. The Black Rock mine sat on a particularly isolated stretch of land, surrounded by dense forest and rocky outcroppings that seemed to swallow sound itself. Local Cherokee and Osage tribes had long avoided this area, passing down stories that the land was tainted, that something malevolent dwelt in its depths. But in 1915, such warnings were dismissed as superstitious nonsense by men desperate for work and companies hungry for profit. Working conditions in these mines were brutal beyond modern comprehension. Men toiled in spaces so narrow they couldn't stand upright, breathing air thick with dust and poisonous gases. Cave-ins were common, flooding was constant, and explosions could turn a routine day into a mass funeral without warning. Yet still they came, immigrants fleeing poverty in Ireland and Italy, war veterans seeking a fresh start, and local farmers whose crops had failed yet again. The pay was decent when it came, but that was never guaranteed. Companies would often declare bankruptcy, or simply disappear, leaving workers with nothing but black lung disease and broken bodies as compensation for their sacrifice. It was a system built on desperation, sustained by hope, and powered by the kind of courage that borders on madness. The 14 men who gathered at Black Rock that October morning represented the typical cross-section of Ozark miners. There was Patrick O'Brien, a Dublin native who'd fled the poverty of Ireland only to find himself descending into American darkness. Giuseppe Rossi had crossed an ocean with dreams of sending money back to his village in Sicily. Samuel Crawford was a Confederate veteran, his left arm still stiff from a Yankee bullet, but his determination unbroken. Among them stood the youngest, barely 16-year-old Thomas Mitchell, whose father had died in a mine collapse the previous spring. The boy had lied about his age to get work, driven by the desperate need to feed his mother and 3 younger sisters. His presence at the mine that morning would haunt the community for decades, a reminder of how the earth seemed to hunger for innocence along with experience. These men carried with them the hopes and fears of entire families. Above ground, wives packed lunch pails with whatever scraps they could afford. Children kissed fathers goodbye without knowing it might be forever. And mothers whispered prayers to saints, both Catholic and Protestant, hedging their bets against the darkness below. The mining communities of the Ozarks were melting pots of desperation and determination. Irish accents mingled with Italian dialects. German efficiency met Appalachian stubbornness, and somehow, in the crucible of shared hardship, these diverse groups forged bonds stronger than blood. They celebrated each other's saints' days, shared their meager resources, and mourned their common losses with a unity born of mutual survival. But even among these hardy souls, the Black Rock mine had earned a reputation that made seasoned miners cross themselves and mutter protective charms. It wasn't just the usual dangers that plagued all mining operations. Black Rock seemed to possess a malevolent intelligence of its own. The stories had begun almost immediately after the mine's opening in 1913. Workers reported tools vanishing overnight, only to reappear in impossible locations deep within sealed tunnels. The sound of knocking would echo through the shafts. Not the regular rhythm of human work, but an erratic, almost frantic tapping that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Veteran miners knew the folklore of warning knocks, mysterious sounds that supposedly preceded cave-ins or gas explosions. But the sounds at Black Rock were different. They seemed to follow workers, growing louder when men were alone, fading to whispers when groups gathered. Some claimed to hear voices in the darkness, speaking in languages that predated any human settlement in the region. The Cherokee elders in the area had their own explanations. They spoke of the little people, supernatural beings who dwelt in caves and underground places, protective of their realm and hostile to human intrusion. According to their traditions, this particular stretch of land had always been avoided, marked by signs that white settlers either couldn't read or chose to ignore. "The earth bleeds here," old Joseph Silverfeather had warned the mine supervisors when construction began. "It has tasted death before, and it hungers for more." His words were recorded in a local newspaper as quaint folklore. But those who worked in Black Rock's depths found less humor in such warnings as the months passed. There were the accidents, of course, more than any mine should reasonably experience. A cable snapped, sending a cage full of workers plummeting 50 feet. A support beam gave way without warning, trapping 3 men for 36 hours before rescue crews could reach them. 2 of he 3 died anyway, crushed beyond recognition. Gas leaked from unknown sources, forcing evacuations that cost the company thousands in lost productivity. But it was the inexplicable incidents that truly unnerved the workforce. Men would report seeing lights moving in sealed sections of the mine, areas that had been boarded up after earlier accidents. The temperature in certain tunnels would drop suddenly, turning breath to frost even in summer. Compasses spun wildly in specific locations, as if the Earth's magnetic field had been twisted into knots. Perhaps most disturbing were the disappearances of equipment. Not theft, that was commonplace enough, but vanishings that defied explanation. A pneumatic drill would be secured at the end of a shift, only to be found the next morning at the bottom of a flooded shaft that had been sealed for months. Lunch pails would disappear from workers' sides, only to be discovered days later in narrow crevices no human could possibly reach. The mine supervisors, practical men focused on profit margins and production quotas, dismissed such reports as the product of overactive imaginations and too much moonshine. They instituted new security measures, installed better lighting, and hired additional guards. But the incidents continued, and the whispers grew louder. On that fateful October morning in 1915, even the most superstitious workers had no choice but to descend into Black Rock's depths. The alternative was unemployment, and in the Ozarks of 1915, unemployment meant starvation. So they gathered their courage along with their tools, kissed their families goodbye, and prepared to face whatever darkness awaited them below. The mine shaft dropped straight down for nearly 200 feet before branching into a maze of horizontal tunnels that followed the ore veins deep into the mountain's heart. The main elevator, a rickety contraption of wood and steel cables, could carry 8 men at a time, so the 14 workers would make the descent in 2 groups. As the first cage disappeared into the black depths, those waiting above couldn't have known they were witnessing the last time any of these men would see daylight. The pulleys creaked, the cables sang their metallic song, and somewhere far below, the earth prepared to claim its due. The descent began at 6:30 in the morning, just as the first pale light began to touch the mountain peaks. The mine's steam engine chugged to life, belching black smoke into the crisp air as it powered the elevator system. Birds fell silent in the surrounding trees, as if nature itself sensed something amiss. Patrick O'Brien was among the first group to descend. As the cage dropped into darkness, he crossed himself and muttered a prayer in Gaelic his grandmother had taught him, a blessing for those who must walk in the shadow of death. The Irish had their own mining superstitions, learned through generations of digging coal from the earth's bones, and every instinct Patrick possessed was screaming warnings he couldn't quite articulate. Giuseppe Rossi clutched his St. Christopher medal as the elevator plunged deeper. He'd carried it from Sicily, where his grandfather had been a sulfur miner, another man who'd spent his life in darkness for the promise of light. The medal was warm against his chest, but the air around him grew colder with each foot of descent. Above ground, the mine supervisor, a thick-set German named Klaus Brenner, checked his pocket watch and made notes in his ledger. Production quotas had to be met, and the company executives in Kansas City were growing impatient with BlackRock's declining output. He'd promised them results, and results meant pushing the workers harder, deeper, into sections of the mine that perhaps should have remained unexplored. The wives and mothers who had gathered to see their men off lingered near the mine entrance longer than usual that morning. Maria Rossi would later tell investigators that she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. Margaret O'Brien claimed she heard her late mother's voice warning her to call Patrick back, but dismissed it as nerves. These women had learned to live with fear as a constant companion, but something about that particular morning felt different, ominous, in a way that made them want to gather their children close and run. By 7 o'clock, all 14 men had descended into Black Rock's depths. The mine entrance fell quiet except for the rhythmic chug of the steam engine and the occasional screech of metal on metal as the elevator cables adjusted to their load. Brenner sent the cage down one final time with supplies and fresh lantern oil, then settled in to wait for the first load of ore to be sent up. Hours passed. The October sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist and warming the mountainside. Other mines in the region were already sending up their first loads of the day, but BlackRock remained silent. By noon, Brenner was pacing nervously, checking and rechecking his equipment. The wives began arriving around 1 o'clock, carrying lunch pails they'd prepared for their husbands' midday break. It was customary for the men to send the cage up to collect their meals, a brief moment of connection between the world above and the world below. But the cage sat motionless at the surface, and no signals came from the depths. "Maybe they've hit a rich vein," suggested Anna Crawford, though her voice carried no conviction. "Sometimes the men work straight through when the ore is good." But Samuel Crawford was a methodical man, never one to skip a meal or ignore protocol. If he was down there, he would have sent word. By 3 o'clock, panic had begun to set in. Brenner had tried repeatedly to signal the workers below using the mine's communication system, a series of bells and whistles that could carry messages up and down the shaft. But only silence answered his increasingly frantic calls. Other mine supervisors from the area began to arrive, drawn by the growing crowd of worried families. The mining community was tight-knit by necessity, bound together by shared danger and mutual dependence. When disaster struck one mine, it sent ripples of fear through every other operation in the region. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, casting long shadows across the mine site, Brenner made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He assembled a rescue team of volunteers from neighboring mines, men who knew the risks but couldn't abandon their brothers in the darkness below. The rescue cage descended into Black Rock at 4:30 in the afternoon, carrying 6 of the most experienced miners in the district. They were equipped with extra lanterns, medical supplies, and breathing apparatus designed to protect them from gas leaks. Each man had volunteered despite the mine's reputation, driven by the brotherhood that bound all who worked beneath the earth. What they found in the depths of Black Rock would challenge everything they thought they knew about mining accidents, human nature, and the very limits of rational explanation. The main tunnel extended nearly a quarter-mile into the mountain, with side passages branching off like the limbs of some vast underground tree. The rescue team's lanterns cast dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls, creating an otherworldly landscape of light and darkness that seemed to shift and move with each step. They found the workers' lunch pails first, scattered along the main tunnel as if dropped in haste. The contents were untouched: sandwiches of bread and bacon, apples from local orchards, bottles of water that had been carefully rationed for the long day ahead, but there was no sign of the men who had carried them. Deeper into the mine, the rescue team discovered tools abandoned in mid-use. Pickaxes were embedded in the tunnel walls, as if their wielders had simply vanished in the middle of a swing. Lanterns sat extinguished but still warm, their oil reservoirs half full. It was as if time had stopped in the middle of an ordinary workday, freezing a moment that made no sense. The air in the tunnels was strangely still, carrying none of the usual sounds of an active mine. No dripping water, no settling of wooden supports, no scurrying of the rats that typically infested such places. Even the rescue team's voices seemed muffled, as if the darkness itself was absorbing sound. It was in the furthest reaches of the mine, nearly a mile from the main shaft, that the rescue team made their horrifying discovery. In a narrow side tunnel that barely allowed a man to stand upright, they found the first skull. It sat alone on a rocky ledge, as if carefully placed there by some unseen hand. The bone was clean, picked bare of flesh, but it was unmistakably human. More disturbing was its condition. The skull showed no signs of trauma, no cracks or breaks that might explain how its owner had died. It simply sat there, empty sockets staring into the darkness, as if waiting for someone to find it. The rescue team leader, a veteran miner named Dutch Morrison, had seen his share of mining accidents over 30 years underground. He'd pulled bodies from collapsed tunnels, helped identify victims of gas explosions, and comforted families who would never see their loved ones alive again. But nothing had prepared him for what lay deeper in that narrow passage. 13 more skulls were scattered throughout the tunnel system, each one clean and white, as if they'd been bleached by some unknown process. They were found in the most unlikely places, balanced on narrow ledges, tucked into crevices barely width, deep enough to accommodate them, arranged in patterns that seemed almost ritualistic in their precision. But the skulls raised more questions than they answered. Where were the bodies? How had 14 healthy men been reduced to nothing but clean bone in a matter of hours? And why were the skulls scattered so far from where the men had been working, in passages so narrow that moving them there would have required deliberate effort? The rescue team searched for 3 more days, mapping every tunnel and crevice in the mine's extensive network. They found personal effects, wedding rings, pocket watches, religious medals, but no trace of flesh, clothing, or any evidence that might explain what had befallen the missing workers. When news of the discovery reached the surface, it sent shock waves through the entire Ozark region. Newspapers as far away as St. Louis and Kansas City picked up the story, each adding their own sensational details to an already incredible tale. 14 miners vanish. Only skulls remain, screamed the headlines, while editorial writers struggled to find rational explanations for the inexplicable. The Missouri Bureau of Mines dispatched its most experienced investigators to examine the scene. Dr. Harrison Webb, the state's chief mine inspector, arrived with a team of engineers, geologists, and medical experts, determined to find a scientific explanation for the tragedy. Their preliminary examination ruled out the most common causes of mining deaths. There was no evidence of a gas explosion, no scorch marks, no structural damage, no chemical residue in the air. Cave-ins were similarly eliminated. The tunnel supports were intact, and there were no signs of recent rockfalls or structural failure. The possibility of flooding was considered and rejected. The mine's drainage systems were functioning normally, and there was no evidence that water levels had risen significantly in recent weeks. Besides, flooding would have left bodies, not scattered skulls. Dr. Webb's medical examination of the skulls proved equally puzzling. All 14 showed signs of recent death. The bone structure was consistent with healthy adult males, and there were no indications of disease or long-term malnutrition. But there were also no trauma marks, no bullet holes or fractures that might indicate violence. The most disturbing finding was the condition of the bone itself. Under microscopic examination, the skulls showed a peculiar pitting and scarring that Dr. Webb had never encountered before. The bone surface appeared to have been etched by some unknown chemical process, as if exposed to an acid that could dissolve flesh while leaving the underlying structure intact. It's as if something consumed the soft tissue while preserving the skeletal structure, Dr. Webb wrote in his official report. But I am aware of no natural process that could produce such results in so short a time period. The investigation expanded to include experts from Washington, D.C., and even scientists from the Smithsonian Institution. Each new expert brought fresh theories but no definitive answers. Some suggested the involvement of unknown bacteria or fungi that might exist in the mine's unique environment. Others proposed that gas leaks might have created chemical conditions capable of rapid decomposition. But for every scientific theory proposed, the evidence seemed to point in another direction. The scattered locations of the skulls, the pristine condition of the workers' equipment, the complete absence of any remains other than bone, all of it defied conventional explanation. As the official investigation dragged on for weeks, the local community developed its own theories about what had happened in the depths of Black Rock. The rational explanations offered by experts from outside the region carried little weight with people who had lived alongside the mines. Strangeness for years. Old-timers spoke of the Cherokee warnings that had gone unheeded. They recalled the strange incidents that had plagued the mine since its opening. The mysterious sounds, the vanishing equipment, the unnatural cold spots that defied explanation. To them, the fate of the 14 miners was not a mystery, but a confirmation of what they had always known. Some places were never meant to be disturbed. The Irish families in the community turned to their own folklore for answers. They spoke of the Bean Sheehy, harbingers of death, who wailed in the darkness before tragedy struck. They remembered the old stories of mines haunted by the spirits of workers who had died in accidents, restless souls who jealously guarded their subterranean realm. Italian immigrants brought tales from their homeland of underground creatures that dwelt in caverns and volcanic caves, beings that were neither fully alive nor fully dead, sustained by darkness and feeding on human essence. These stories, dismissed as superstition by educated authorities, carried the weight of ancestral memory for those who told them. But perhaps the most chilling theory came from the mine workers themselves, those who had survived by staying above ground that October day. They spoke in whispers of something they called the hunger, an intelligence that dwelt in the deepest parts of the earth, awakened by the constant intrusion of human activity. According to this folklore, the hunger was patient, waiting for the right moment to claim its due. It could preserve life in ways that defied natural law, keeping its victims alive while slowly consuming them from within. The scattered skulls were not evidence of death, the workers claimed, but proof that something far worse had occurred in Black Rock's depths. Such theories might have been easier to dismiss if not for the physical evidence that supported them. The condition of the skulls, the precision of their placement, the complete absence of any other remains, all of it suggested an intelligence behind the tragedy, something that had deliberately arranged the scene for maximum psychological impact. As October turned to November, and the official investigation continued to yield no concrete answers, the pressure on local authorities intensified. 14 families demanded justice, while mining companies throughout the region worried about the economic impact of the tragedy. If word spread that the Ozark mines were cursed or dangerous beyond normal limits, it could destroy the entire industry. Governor Frederick Gardner personally intervened, ordering a final comprehensive investigation that would either solve the mystery or officially close the case. He appointed a special commission that included mine safety experts, criminal investigators, and even a professor of geology from the University of Missouri. The commission spent 2 months examining every aspect of the Black Rock incident. They interviewed hundreds of witnesses, analyzed soil samples from throughout the mine, and even brought in tracking dogs to search for any trace of the missing bodies. Their final report, issued in January 1916, ran to over 300 pages, but could be summarized in a single frustrating conclusion: unknown causes. While we have eliminated all known explanations for this tragedy, the report stated, we cannot definitively determine what occurred in the Black Rock mine on October 15, 1915. The evidence suggests an unprecedented event that falls outside the normal parameters of mining accidents or criminal activity. It was a conclusion that satisfied no one. The families of the victims felt betrayed by official science's inability to provide answers. The mining companies worried that the mystery would hurt their operations indefinitely. And the workers themselves continued to live with the knowledge that something unspeakable lurked in the depths they descended into each day. The Black Rock mine was officially sealed in February 1916, its entrance dynamited shut and marked with warning signs that prohibited any future excavation. The mining company declared bankruptcy shortly thereafter, its assets sold to pay legal fees and survivor benefits that barely covered the cost of funeral services. But sealing the mine did little to quiet the stories that continued to circulate throughout the Ozark Mountains. Local residents reported strange sounds coming from the sealed entrance, not the settling of wooden supports or the drip of underground water, but sounds that seemed almost human in their rhythm and intensity. Children walking near the former mine site claimed to hear voices calling from beneath the ground, speaking in the accents of Ireland and Italy, pleading for help that could never come. Dogs refused to approach the area, and horses would shy away from the road that led to the sealed entrance. The Cherokee elder Joseph Silverfeather, who had warned against opening the mine, lived long enough to see its closure. Before his death in 1918, he told a local newspaper reporter that the sealing was too little, too late. The damage had been done, he claimed, and the hunger that had claimed 14 souls would not rest easy behind a wall of stone and steel. The families of the victims never fully recovered from their losses. Without bodies to bury, they held memorial services that felt incomplete, hollow rituals that provided little comfort. Many of the widows left the region entirely, unable to bear living so close to the place where their husbands had vanished. Margaret O'Brien returned to Ireland with her 3 children, carrying Patrick's wedding ring and a photograph taken on their last anniversary. Maria Rossi moved to St. Louis, where her brother had found work in a brewery, trading one kind of industrial danger for another that at least made rational sense. Anna Crawford stayed in the area but never remarried, spending her remaining years tending to a garden that she claimed grew unusually well in the soil near the sealed mine. "The earth is rich here," she would tell visitors, though she never explained what she thought had enriched it. Young Thomas Mitchell's mother, who had lost both husband and son to the mines, became a vocal advocate for mining safety regulations. She testified before state legislative committees, sharing her family's story as a warning about the true cost of industrial progress. But her pleas for stricter oversight fell on deaf ears, and mining accidents continued to claim lives throughout the region. The official records of the Black Rock incident were filed away in Jefferson City, joining thousands of other documents related to Missouri's industrial development. But unlike most bureaucratic paperwork, these files seemed to exert a strange fascination over those who encountered them. Clerks and researchers who worked with the documents reported unsettling dreams and a persistent feeling of being watched. Dr. Harrison Webb, the state mine inspector who had led the investigation, never spoke publicly about the case again after submitting his final report. Colleagues noted that he seemed changed by the experience, more cautious and prone to moments of distraction when underground sounds were mentioned. He retired earlier than planned and moved to Florida, seeking what he called sunshine and shallow water. As the years passed and memories faded, the Black Rock incident began to take on the quality of legend rather than historical fact. New generations of miners heard the story as a cautionary tale, a reminder that the earth held secrets that were better left undisturbed. But they also heard it as something more, a warning that some hungers could never be satisfied, and that the darkness beneath their feet might be more alive than they dared to imagine. The sealed mine entrance became a destination for curious visitors and thrill-seekers, drawn by the mystery and the local folklore that had grown up around it. Most found nothing more than a concrete barrier and some rusted warning signs. But a few claimed to experience something more unsettling, a sense of presence, of something waiting just beyond the reach of human perception. Local law enforcement eventually erected additional barriers and posted no trespassing signs, tired of dealing with reports from visitors who claimed to have heard voices or seen lights moving behind the sealed entrance. But the reports continued, generation after generation, each adding new details to the growing legend of the Black Rock Mine. The Cherokee Nation maintained their own interpretation of the tragedy, passing down the story as confirmation of traditional warnings about disturbing sacred ground. They spoke of the need to maintain balance between the world above and the world below, and of the consequences that followed when that balance was broken. Academic researchers occasionally attempted to revisit the case, hoping that new scientific methods might shed light on the old mystery. But the sealed mine remained inaccessible, and the official records, while extensive, contained no physical evidence that could be subjected to modern analysis. In 1975, on the 60th anniversary of the tragedy, a local newspaper ran a retrospective article that interviewed some of the few surviving relatives of the original families. Their memories had been shaped by decades of retelling, but their conviction remained strong. Something unnatural had claimed their ancestors, something that scientific investigation had been powerless to identify or explain. The article sparked renewed interest in the case, drawing attention from paranormal investigators and documentary filmmakers. But permission to unseal the mine was never granted, and the mystery remained as impenetrable as the concrete barrier that blocked access to its depths. Today, more than a century after 14 men descended into Black Rock Mine for the last time, the Ozark Mountains continue to hold their secrets. The mining industry that once defined the region has largely moved on, leaving behind scarred landscapes and abandoned towns as monuments to an era when human ambition seemed capable of conquering any obstacle. But among those who know the old stories, who remember the warnings passed down through generations of mountain families, the lesson of Black Rock remains vivid. The earth is not passive, not merely a repository of resources waiting to be extracted. It is alive in ways that human understanding has barely begun to grasp, and it remembers every intrusion, every violation of its ancient integrity. The 14 skulls found in Black Rock's depths were eventually buried in the local cemetery, their headstones bearing names but no bodies, dates of birth, but circumstances of death that remained forever unknown. Their families mourned not just the loss of their loved ones, but the loss of certainty, the comfortable belief that the world operated according to rules that human reason could comprehend. In the end, perhaps that was the true tragedy of Black Rock, not just the deaths of 14 good men, but the revelation that beneath the familiar surface of the world lay depths of mystery that no amount of scientific investigation could fully illuminate. The mine had offered a glimpse into the unknown, and what it revealed was so disturbing that the only response was to seal it away and try to forget. But forgetting has proven impossible. The story of Black Rock Mine continues to circulate through the Ozarks, passed down from generation to generation like a genetic memory of terror. It serves as a reminder that for all of humanity's technological progress, for all our confidence in our ability to understand and control the natural world, there remain corners of existence where ancient hungers dwell, waiting patiently in the darkness for their next opportunity to feed. The concrete barrier that seals the Black Rock Mine entrance bears no inscription, no memorial to the 14 men who vanished in its depths. But those who know the story claim that on quiet nights, when the wind moves through the mountain pines just right, you can still hear the echo of their final moments. Not screams of terror, but something far more disturbing. The sound of realization. The moment when rational men understood that they had descended not just into a mine, but into a realm where the very foundations of reality bent to accommodate hungers that predated human civilization by eons. And in that realization, perhaps, lies the true horror of the Black Rock incident. Not that 14 men died in an industrial accident, but that they discovered something in those tunnels that challenged every assumption about the nature of existence itself. Something that proved the Cherokee elders right, that confirmed the warnings embedded in folklore and superstition, that revealed the thin veneer of civilization for what it truly was, a fragile barrier between humanity and forces that regarded human life as nothing more than sustenance for appetites that could never be satisfied. The Ozark Mountains keep their secrets well, and the sealed entrance to Black Rock Mine stands as a monument not to human achievement, but to human limitation. It marks the boundary between the known and the unknowable, the comfortable and the terrifying, the rational and the impossible. And for those brave or foolish enough to listen, it whispers a warning that echoes across the decades. Some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. In the depths of those mountains, something still waits, something that remembers the taste of 14 souls and hungers for more, something that understands patience in ways that human minds cannot grasp, content to wait decades or centuries for the next opportunity to feed. The concrete barrier may hold it back for now, but concrete crumbles, and time has a way of wearing down even the strongest human efforts to contain the uncontainable. And so the mystery of Black Rock Mine endures, a reminder that beneath our feet lies not just rock and soil and mineral veins, but realms of existence that operate according to rules we have never learned and hungers we dare not acknowledge. The 14 men who vanished in 1915 discovered this truth too late to save themselves. But their story serves as a warning to those who come after. In the deepest places of the earth, humanity is not the apex predator we imagine ourselves to be, but merely another item on a menu written in languages older than civilization itself. The Ozarks remember, and in remembering, they warn. But whether future generations will heed that warning, or whether human ambition will once again drive men to disturb what should be left alone, remains a question that only time and the patient hunger that dwells in darkness can answer. This story ends, but many await. Subscribe so no tale escapes you.